The anesthesia wore off slowly, the way it always does. First, the sounds, then the lights, then the particular weight of your own body coming back to you all at once. The recovery nurse was kind. She kept her voice low and told me everything had gone well, that Dr. Reyes had closed cleanly, that I would need to stay one more night for observation. I nodded. My throat was dry. The ceiling above me was that particular institutional white that exists only in hospitals. Flat, indifferent, designed to tell you nothing. My husband was not in the chair beside the bed. I noticed that the way you notice something small, and then set it aside. He had been there before I went under. I remembered his hand on mine, the specific weight of it, the way he had said "see you on the other side" with a small smile that I had taken as reassurance. People stepped out. They got coffee. They stretched their legs. I did not make anything of it. What I made something of was the text that came through at 6:14 that evening from my neighbor Patricia. "Diane, there's a locksmith van in your driveway. Is everything okay?" I read it twice. Then I read it a third time. The ceiling fan above my bed turned slowly. My IV line pulled slightly as I reached for the phone. To explain what that message actually meant, I need to take you back to the beginning, the real one. The part that looked perfectly ordinary from the outside. If this story is pulling you in, hit subscribe. New stories every week. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country below. My name is Diana Mercer. I am 42 years old, and I work as a senior estate attorney at a firm in Nashville, Tennessee. The kind of firm that handles the complicated end of things, where families are at their worst and the documents are the only neutral party in the room. Nashville is not what people imagine when they picture it. There is the part with the honky, tonks and the bachelorette sashes and the neon. And then there is the part where actual people live, neighborhoods with front porches, and established trees and houses that have been there long enough to have real character. We lived in Sylvan Park, about 10 minutes from downtown, in a craftsman bungalow with a wide front porch and a side garden. I had been slowly expanding since we moved in. The house had been mine before the marriage, purchased with money I had saved over 8 years. The first major thing I had ever owned entirely on my own terms. I had put my name on that deed alone, not out of mistrust, but because the purchase came before the wedding and Owen had been living in a rental at the time, and it simply made sense. Owen Mercer was 45, a commercial contractor who built things well and talked about them enthusiastically, and was genuinely good company at a dinner table. We met through a mutual friend at a birthday party in our late 30s. The relaxed kind, in someone's backyard, where the conversation can actually go somewhere, because nobody is performing for a crowd. He was straightforward. He was present. He had the quality I have always valued above most others in a person, which is that he said what he meant without requiring you to decode it. We married 3 years after we met, after a long and unhurried courtship that I had always felt good about. The early years of the marriage were, by any honest measure, genuinely good. His mother, Rosalind, was another matter entirely. Rosalind Mercer was 68 years old and lived 40 minutes south of us in a house. Her late husband had left her, which she spoke of often as a point of pride and occasionally as a point of leverage. She was not cruel. That is important to say clearly, because cruelty would have been easier to name. What she was certain. Certain that Owen's first loyalty was to her. Certain that any woman in his life was, at best, a secondary arrangement. And certain that the house Owen lived in was, in some fundamental sense, a family asset rather than my legal property. She said things like this: "House suits the family well," and Owen grew up knowing how to maintain a home, as though she had built it herself rather than occasionally visiting it. The first time something felt off. Owen and I had been married about 8 months. Rosalind had come for a weekend visit, and while I was at work on a Saturday finishing a brief, she had rearranged the kitchen, not dramatically, just the cabinet where we kept the glasses, moved one shelf up, the spices reorganized alphabetically. When I came home and noticed, she was at the stove making dinner, and she said, "Oh, I hope you don't mind. It just made more sense to me this way." I minded. I did not say so. I moved the glasses back after she left and told myself it was small. On the kitchen windowsill, between a small succulent and a jar of river stones, I had collected on a trip to Colorado years before. I kept a plain white coffee mug that my first mentor in law school had given me. She had written something on the bottom in permanent marker. You already know what you need to know, and I had kept it through every apartment and office move since. It sat there every morning while I made coffee. Ordinary and unremarkable, just part of the texture of my kitchen. I did not think about it much, I just knew it was there. The morning had felt completely ordinary, which is its own kind of cruelty when you look back on it later. I had made coffee in the kitchen while Owen showered. I had stood at the counter and looked out at the side garden, which was doing its October thing. Some things still green, some things starting to turn. The whole yard in that state of beautiful ambivalence that comes right before a season commits to itself. My hospital bag was already packed and waiting by the front door. I had laid everything out the night before with the same methodical attention I bring to preparing for a big hearing. The items in the bag had a logic to them, an order, nothing left to chance. Owen came downstairs, and we had breakfast together. He ate toast. I had half a cup of coffee, and nothing else, because the pre-op instructions had been clear about that. We talked about ordinary things, a contractor issue he was managing, a case I had just handed off to a colleague, whether the neighbor's tree was going to drop branches on our fence again this winter. A completely normal Tuesday morning in a completely normal kitchen. When we left, I locked the front door behind me. I remember the specific weight of the key in my hand. The front door key on the plain ring I kept separate from my car keys, which I had owned since I bought the house 9 years ago, and which had never been duplicated for anyone. I put it in my purse. We got in the car. Owen drove. I looked out the window at the neighborhood going past. The craftsman houses, the old maples, the street I had chosen deliberately, specifically as the street where I wanted to live. It did not occur to me that the next time I tried to use that key, it would not work. The surgery had been scheduled for 6 weeks. It was not an emergency. A fibroid that had been monitored for 2 years had reached a size where my gynecologist recommended removal. And after considerable scheduling and pre-op appointments, and the particular logistical weight of taking 2 weeks off work, the date had been set. Owen knew. Rosalind knew. I had been matter of fact about it because the procedure was serious but not dangerous, and I did not want to make more of it than it was. The morning of the surgery, I was calm in the specific way I am always calm when something is out of my hands. I had prepped the case files I was leaving behind, arranged coverage with 2 colleagues, set the out-off office, packed the hospital bag with the boring practicality the situation required. Owen drove me. He held my hand in the waiting area and said the thing about seeing me on the other side, and I went in. I was under for 4 hours. When I came out, Owen was not in the chair. The nurse said he had stepped out. Then, when I was more alert, that he had gone home. Something about needing to check on a delivery for a job site. She said it gently. She was practiced at delivering information that was not quite what the patient wanted to hear. I lay there and looked at the ceiling and thought, a delivery, on the day of my surgery. Okay. Then Patricia's text came through. Diane, there's a locksmith van in your driveway. Is everything okay? I stared at it. My hand felt strange, still slightly numb from the IV. I tried to think of a reason, any reason, why there would be a locksmith at my house on the afternoon of my surgery. Owen could have lost his key. There could have been a break in some small emergency that required a quick fix. My phone buzzed again. Patricia, the woman who got out of the car. Is that Owen's mother? She went inside with the locksmith. I set the phone face down on the blanket and looked at the ceiling for a long time without moving. Then I picked it up and called my colleague Nadia, who was covering my cases and whose judgment I trusted more than almost anyone I knew. I said, I need a favor, and it cannot wait. She said, tell me. What followed those next 4 days was, from the outside, the picture of a woman recovering from surgery in a hospital room. I slept when the medication required it. I answered the nurses' questions. I ate the food they brought and took the pills on schedule and let them check my vitals. And I was, by every external measure, a cooperative patient. On the inside, I was working. I want to explain what that actually looked like, because it was not dramatic, and it was not loud, and it did not feel the way betrayal looks in stories. It felt like the thing I had been trained to do for 17 years. It felt like case prep. The first call I made after hanging up with Nadia was to the county recorder's office. I had the parcel number memorized because I am the kind of person who memorizes parcel numbers for properties she owns, which had always seemed like an unremarkable professional habit, and now seemed like something else entirely. I asked the clerk to confirm the current record of title on that parcel. The deed was still in my name. Only my name. That was the first piece of information. It told me that whatever Rosalind had done or was doing, and I still did not have the full picture. She had not managed to alter the legal ownership of my property. You cannot change a deed by changing a lock. I knew this with the same calm certainty with which I knew my own address, because I had spent 17 years explaining property law to people in crisis, and the law on this particular point was not complicated. What she had done was trespassed, and whatever else emerged, that fact was not going anywhere. The second call was to Patricia, who was the kind of neighbor who deserved to be thanked for what she had done, and who, it turned out, had also taken photographs on her phone because she had found the whole thing suspicious and wanted documentation in case I needed it. Patricia had been a legal secretary for 11 years before she retired. She knew what documentation was for. She texted me 4 photographs: the locksmith van, clearly marked, with a visible license plate; Rosalind at the front door, speaking to the locksmith; Rosalind inside the front hallway, which Patricia had captured through the side window at an angle that showed both women clearly, and the van leaving. I saved all 4 to my cloud drive immediately. Then I called Nadia back. Nadia Chen had been my closest colleague for 9 years, which was long enough for us to have developed the kind of professional shorthand that skips the preamble. When I told her what I had, she was quiet for exactly 3 seconds before she said, "Okay. What do you need first?" I told her I needed the name of the locksmith company, which I could get from the van's markings in Patricia's photo, and I needed her to make a call on my behalf to confirm the scope of work that had been performed. She had the information within 2 hours. The locksmith company had replaced all exterior locks on the property: front door, back door, and the side garage entry, at the request of, and I want to be specific here, a woman who identified herself as the property owner's family representative and paid in cash. She had planned this. I lay in the hospital bed with that information, and I did not feel rage. I felt something colder than rage and more useful. The particular clarity that comes when you stop hoping you have misread a situation and accept that you have read it correctly. Nadia came to see me that evening. She brought decent coffee from the place 2 blocks from our office, and she sat in the chair beside my bed, and we talked through everything the way we would talk through any case, which is methodically and without editorializing. She said, at one point, "Diane, she didn't do this alone. She had cash and a plan, and she was there the same afternoon Owen left. That's not a coincidence." That sentence landed somewhere specific. I had been holding that particular thought at arm's length, and having Nadia say it plainly in the matter, a fact tone she used for everything, removed the last reason I had to keep it at arm's length. Owen had known. I did not say that out loud. I did not need to. Nadia looked at me, and I looked at her, and we both understood that the next several days were going to require a different kind of work than either of us had originally anticipated. The third call I made, still in the hospital, was to the county property tax office. This will sound like a strange thing to do from a hospital bed, but property tax records are public, and they confirm ownership details, and I wanted independent confirmation from a second source that the deed remained clean. The clerk was helpful, and slightly puzzled by the specificity of my questions. I told her I was an estate attorney, checking records on a matter. She confirmed my name on the parcel without hesitation. 4 sources now confirmed the same fact. The house was mine. The locks could be changed. The code on the garage door could be reset. The keys could be redistributed to any number of people. None of that touched the underlying legal reality, which was recorded in the county office, and would remain there regardless of what Rosalind Mercer believed she had accomplished. What I was less clear on was the scope of what had been planned. The cash withdrawal 4 days before my surgery, $9,000, could explain the locksmith payment, and leave a significant remainder. Cash leaves no record. Cash is chosen specifically because it leaves no record. I thought about the timeline. Owen had taken the money out before the surgery date, which meant before I had gone under, which meant this had not been a spontaneous decision made while I was in the recovery room. It had been prepared for. That particular detail was the one I kept returning to over those 2 days in the hospital, not the lock change itself. As an attorney, I could resolve the lock change with one filing. Not even the money, which was auditable and documentable. It was the preparation, the planning, the decision, made days in advance, that my surgery was an opportunity. You do not plan for an opportunity without deciding, first, what you are going to do with it. I asked Nadia to pull Owen's phone records, not his content, just the call log, which she could request through our firm's contact at a cellular provider we occasionally worked with on estate disputes. I was looking for communication between Owen and Rosalind in the 72 hours before my surgery. What she sent me showed 18 calls between them in that window. The longest running 41 minutes, made at 11 o'clock on the night before I went under. 41 minutes. While I had been asleep in our bedroom, finishing my pre-surgery rest, Owen had been downstairs on the phone with his mother for 41 minutes. I set that information down inside myself very carefully, the way you set down something fragile. Nadia had also, without my asking, pulled the public business registration records for the locksmith company. The company was legitimate. 6 years in business. Licensed and insured. No complaints on record. She had also found, through a contact at the city licensing office, that the work order had been filed under a business account number that traced back to a property management company Owen had been doing contract work for. His name was connected, loosely but traceable, to the account that had authorized the work. Loosely but traceable. In my world, that was enough. I also thought about the key, my key. The front door key on the plain ring, the one I had carried since I signed the deed 9 years ago. It was in my purse, which was in the locker beside my hospital bed, which meant it was here with me and not in the house. Rosalind had replaced the lock without knowing that. She had assumed, presumably, that the key was at home inside the house, where it would do no one any good. The key was with me. The deed was in my name. And I had 17 years of professional experience in exactly the kind of legal situation she had just created. She had changed the locks on the wrong woman's house. There was one more thing I wanted to verify before I left the hospital. And it was the thing I had been putting off because it required me to sit with a question I already knew the answer to. I opened the messaging thread between Owen and me going back 18 months. I was not looking for anything in particular. I had no expectation of finding a smoking text message where Owen outlined the plan in clear language. People who do things they know are wrong tend to be careful about what they commit to writing. What I was looking for was tone, pattern. The quality of the communication between two people, which tells you things that specific content sometimes obscures. What I found was a thread that had become, over the previous 6 months, increasingly surface level. Logistics, schedules. A question about dinner. A forwarded article about something work-related. The ordinary texture of a marriage's communication. Except that when I looked at our thread from a 1.5 years ago, there was more. There were longer messages, questions that required real answers. The back and forth of two people actually talking to each other through a screen. The contrast was visible. The shift had happened gradually enough that I had not marked it as a shift while it was happening. 6 months ago was approximately when Rosalind had begun, according to what Owen later told me, pushing harder about the house. I put the phone down on the blanket. The IV line pulled gently. Outside the window, which faced a section of the hospital's interior courtyard, a single tree was doing its October thing. Half gold, half still green, the leaves not yet committed to falling. I was not angry. I want to be precise about that, because anger would have been the expected response. And I think people sometimes mistake composure for absence of feeling. What I felt was clear. Clarity is its own kind of feeling. Not comfortable, not painful, just accurate. Like a lens finally adjusted to the right focal length. Everything sharp, everything exactly where it actually was. I was ready. Before I tell you what I found next, tell me, what time is it where you are right now? Where are you watching from? I'm always surprised how far these stories travel. Over the following 2 days, still in the hospital, I made a list of every financial and legal document that existed for my property and my marriage. The house deed, in my name. The mortgage, in my name, paid off 4 years ago. The homeowner's insurance, in my name, with Owen listed as a resident. Our joint bank account, which we had opened together 2 years into the marriage, and which contained funds from both of us. Then I looked at something I had not looked at carefully in a long time. Our joint account's recent transaction history. I had access to it on my phone. The same way I had access to everything, because I was, professionally, someone who organized financial documents for a living, and I had applied that same organization to my own life. The transaction history showed a withdrawal of $9,000, made in cash, 4 days before my surgery. Owen had told me he had taken $2,000 out for a contractor payment the previous week. He had not mentioned $9,000. He had not mentioned cash. He had not mentioned anything. I noted the date, the amount, and the transaction ID. Then I kept going. There were 3 other withdrawals in the previous 6 weeks that I had not questioned at the time, because they had been modest amounts, and I had assumed they were the ordinary friction of household expenses and job-related costs. Arranged together on a timeline, they added up to $14,200. $14,000, moved in cash. In the 6 weeks before my surgery, I closed the banking app and looked at the ceiling for a while. The white paint had a faint crack running from the light fixture toward the window, the kind of crack that accumulates over years, slow and nearly invisible, that you only see when you are lying flat on your back, with nothing else to look at. I thought about the kitchen in my house, about the cabinet with the glasses that Rosalind had rearranged 4 years ago, and I had moved back without saying anything, about the way she referred to my house as the family home with a consistency I had noticed, but filed away as personality rather than intent, about Owen saying, "See you on the other side," and then leaving, about a locksmith van in my driveway while I was in a recovery room, about the white coffee mug on my kitchen windowsill, which was now, presumably, behind a lock I did not have a key to. I picked up my phone and called my attorney. Not Nadia, a different colleague, one who handled domestic property disputes and had the particular temperament for conflict that the work required. Her name was Carmen, and when she answered, I said, "I need to brief you on something, and I need you to start a file tonight." She said, "Talk." So I talked. By the time I was discharged 2 days later, Carmen had reviewed the property deed, the transaction records, Patricia's photographs, the locksmith company's confirmation of scope, and a written timeline I had dictated to Nadia from my hospital bed. The file was organized, sourced, and ready. Carmen had also drafted a formal notice of unlawful lock change to be served on Rosalind Mercer, and a letter to Owen that was careful and specific in its language, and left absolutely no room for misunderstanding about where things stood legally. I had everything I needed. I was ready to go home, to a house I owned, whose locks had been changed without my knowledge or consent, by a woman who had decided, apparently, that my recovery was a good opportunity. She had forgotten one thing. She had forgotten whose name was on the deed. Carmen walked me through the full legal picture with the same unhurried precision she brought to everything. The lock change was the simplest piece. Under Tennessee property law, an unauthorized change of locks on a property by a non-owner, regardless of their relationship to the owner or to a resident, constituted unlawful interference with property rights. The remedy was straightforward. Documented demand, legal filing if ignored, court order if necessary. Carmen anticipated it would not get to court. People who change locks from a position of assumed authority tend to retreat quickly when they discover the authority was assumed. The bank account question was more nuanced. Owen's withdrawals were his legal right as a joint account holder. Carmen was clear about that, and I had already known it. What the withdrawals could do, and what Carmen intended to make clear to Owen's attorney, when and if he retained one, was paint a picture. A pattern of cash withdrawals in the weeks before a planned action on marital property, culminating in a cash payment to a contractor who performed unauthorized work, was not evidence of a crime. It was evidence of intent, of coordination, of a plan. Evidence of intent had a way of being persuasive in subsequent proceedings. whatever form those proceedings took. I did not tell Carmen what those proceedings would look like. I had not decided yet. What I knew was that I was not going to have that decision made for me by someone else's locksmith. She asked whether I had somewhere to stay while the locks were being restored. I told her I was staying with Nadia. She nodded and made a note. Outside Carmen's office window, the October Street was going about its business. A woman walking a dog, a delivery truck idling at the corner, two men in construction vests eating lunch on a retaining wall. All of it completely ordinary. All of it entirely indifferent to what was happening on the third floor. I sat with my bag in my lap and thought about the white mug on my kitchen windowsill. Behind a lock I did not have a key to. It was sitting exactly where I had left it, waiting, which was something it had always been good at. Nadia picked me up from the hospital on a Thursday morning. She had brought the good coffee again, and a clean change of clothes I had asked her to collect from her own guest room, because I was not about to go to Carmen's office in a hospital gown. We drove through the city in the thin October light, past neighborhoods I knew well, past the turn that would have taken us towards Sylvan Park and my locked front door, and went instead to the third floor of a building in Midtown, where Carmen Vasquez had her practice. Carmen was compact, precise, and had the quality I most admired in attorneys of her type. She was never surprised. She had seen enough domestic property disputes and enough human behavior at its least rational that virtually nothing registered on her face as shocking. She reviewed my documents the way I reviewed documents in my own practice, methodically, without commentary. To the end, when she finished, she set the folder down and said, "The locksmith performed work on your property at the instruction of someone who had no legal authority to authorize it. The cash payment doesn't change that. The fact that she identified herself as a family representative doesn't change that. The deed is yours." I told her I knew. She said, "Owen's access to the joint account is legal. The withdrawals were large, but not illegal in themselves. That's the harder piece." I said I knew that too. She asked what outcome I was looking for. It was the right question, the one I always asked my own clients, and I had been thinking about the answer since I lay in the recovery room looking at the ceiling. I told her I wanted the locks restored, a formal legal record of what had occurred, and a clear accounting of the joint account withdrawals. I told her I was not certain yet what I wanted from my marriage, but that I was certain what I wanted from the law, and the law part needed to happen first. Carmen nodded. She had heard that distinction before. On the way out, I sat in Nadia's car for a moment before she started the engine. Through the passenger window, I could see the October trees doing what they do, turning without drama, just going from what they were to something else. I thought about the white mug on my kitchen windowsill, sitting there behind a lock that was no longer mine to open. I did not say any of that to Nadia. Some things are better held quietly until the work is done. Carmen had told me to let her speak first, and to say as little as possible unless directly asked a question. This is standard advice in any meeting where documents are doing most of the work, and I had given the same advice to clients enough times to follow it without difficulty. What I had not fully anticipated was how the room would feel. I had been in hundreds of conference rooms in my professional life, rooms where families discovered what their relatives had left them, rooms where marriages ended in paperwork, rooms where people sat across from each other with years of shared history and a table between them and documents that said something none of them wanted to hear. I had always been the attorney in those rooms, the neutral party, the one who managed the temperature of the space. Being the client in that room was different. The table was the same, the documents were the same. The particular quality of silence that settles when a folder is opened and reviewed, that was exactly the same. What was different was that my name was in the documents. My house, my marriage, my kitchen. I kept my hands flat on the table and looked at the documents along with everyone else and did not move. Rosalind looked at the photographs for a long time, longer than I expected. There was something in her face while she looked at them that I had not seen there before. Not quite guilt, but something adjacent to it. The expression of someone who had done something they were certain was justified and was now watching the justification fail to hold up in a room with actual consequences. She said, "I thought he was going to leave you. He told me he was considering it." Owen's jaw tightened. She said, "I was trying to protect the family," Carmen said gently. "Mrs. Mercer, That protection isn't available to you legally. Rosalind looked at Owen. He looked at the table. Something passed between them in that exchange that I did not need decoded. The particular communication of people who have been in each other's orbit so long that their silences mean things. Owen said, "Mom, this isn't." He stopped. Rosalind closed her folder. She placed both hands on top of it. Flat. Still. She did not look at me again. I looked at the mug I had placed on the table, carried from the house on the day the locks had been restored. The permanent marker on the bottom, invisible from where anyone else was sitting. You already know what you need to know. It sat at the edge of my documents like it always had. Ordinary, unremarkable, and entirely mine. The formal meeting took place in Carmen's conference room on a Monday morning. Owen arrived with Rosalind, which told me something. He had not come alone, had not called ahead to say he would be bringing her, had simply arrived with his mother, as though this were a family matter rather than a legal one. Rosalind wore a dark jacket and the expression of a woman who expected to manage the room, the way she always managed rooms, through sheer certainty of her own position. Carmen had placed the documents in the center of the table before anyone sat down. The deed, Patricia's photographs, the locksmith confirmation, the bank statement with the withdrawals highlighted, the formal notice that had already been served. I sat down. Owen sat across from me. Rosalind sat beside him. Carmen spoke first, as we had agreed she would. She went through the documents in order, without editorializing, without raising her voice, the way good attorneys present evidence, as though the facts were self-explanatory, which they were. Rosalind's expression changed somewhere around the third photograph, not dramatically, just a slight stiffening, a tightening around the mouth, the face of someone recalibrating. Owen looked at the bank statement for a long time. When Carmen finished, Rosalind said, "This is a family matter. It should have been handled privately." Her voice was steady, but there was something different underneath it. The particular register of someone who has realized the room does not belong to them, Carmen said calmly. It became a legal matter when the locks were changed. Rosalind looked at me directly. The first time since she had sat down, she said, "Owen told me you were considering selling, that the two of you had discussed options." I looked at Owen. He did not look at me. I said, "No." One word. "It was enough," Owen said. Finally, in a voice that sounded like something deflating, "Mom, I didn't tell you she was selling. I said I wasn't sure what was going to happen, and that you shouldn't." He stopped. Rosalind said, "You said she might not come back." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. The room was very quiet. I looked at the table for a moment. On the corner of Carmen's credenza behind her, there was a small potted plant I had not noticed before, the kind that survives anything. No water, no light, just persistence. It had no business being beautiful, and yet there it was. Then I looked at the white mug I had brought with me to that meeting, carried in my bag, taken out when we arrived, sitting now on the table in front of me where I could see it. The permanent marker on the bottom was invisible from this angle, but I knew what it said. You already know what you need to know. I knew. The weeks that followed had the particular texture of things returning to their proper shape after being bent. Nadia brought wine the Friday after the conference room meeting, and we sat on my front porch in the October cold with blankets, and talked for 3 hours about everything except the case, which was exactly what I needed. She had carried a significant portion of the logistical weight of the past 2 weeks, without complaint, and without keeping a visible account of it, which was one of the many things that made her irreplaceable. At one point she said, "You know what I keep thinking about?" And I said, "What?" And she said, "The 41-minute phone call." And then neither of us said anything for a while because there was nothing that needed to be added to it. Several people reached out in the weeks after the meeting. Owen's sister called and left a voicemail that was careful and apologetic, and said she had not known the plan and was mortified. I believed her. I called her back and we had a short, honest conversation that left both of us, I think, with a clearer view of what had actually happened inside that family. 2 of Owen's cousins, whom I had always liked, sent separate messages. One sent a card. I appreciated both without reading too much into them. People are often better than the worst moment in their family's history, and I had never made the mistake of extending punishment past the people who had earned it. Owen's departure from the house was handled through Carmen's office. He took what was his with the particular quietness of someone who understood. He did not have a strong position. He did not try to argue about the house. He could not have argued about the house. He took his tools, his clothes, the reading chair he had always claimed as his, and 3 boxes of miscellaneous items that he had identified, and I had not contested. On the last day, he paused at the front door. My front door, with its original lock, restored, and said, "I'm sorry, Diane, I should have said something instead of going along with it." I told him I appreciated him saying that. It was not enough. It was also not nothing. I had spent enough time in rooms where people said nothing at all to understand the value of a true sentence, even a late one. Carmen filed the final paperwork in December. The process had been clean. As divorces go in situations where the property question is not contested, and both parties have attorneys who prefer efficiency to theater, I paid her invoice and filed the closing documents in my own cabinet. Under a new tab I labeled Resolved. Then I ordered the paint. The legal resolution moved quickly because the facts were not complicated. Carmen filed the formal complaint with the county. The locksmith company, when contacted by Carmen's office, confirmed in writing the scope of work and the instruction it had received, and noted that the company had not verified the identity of the person who had authorized the work beyond her verbal self-identification. The company was cooperative. They did not want the liability. The locks were restored to their original configuration within 72 hours of the meeting, with a written record of the restoration. The joint account was a separate matter and a more complicated one. The withdrawals were legal in themselves. Owen had access to the account, and withdrawing money from a joint account is not theft. What they revealed, however, was relevant to the broader picture of our marriage and to the conversation Owen and I eventually had. Carmen prepared a full accounting of the withdrawals, their timing relative to my surgery, and the cash payment made to the locksmith company. The math was not difficult. Owen came to the house alone, 1 week after the conference room, on a Tuesday evening when the light was doing that thing it does in October, low and slightly gold, making everything look more significant than it probably is. He sat at the kitchen table, which was my kitchen table, and he told me the truth, which was not as complicated as I had half expected it to be. He said his mother had been talking for years about the house, about how it was not really theirs, how she had no security in it, how if something happened to me it would go to probate, and she would have no claim. He said he had listened to this for longer than he should have, and had not pushed back the way he should have, and that in the weeks before my surgery, when his mother had escalated, had said, "This is your chance, Owen, to make sure we're protected." He had let her move forward without stopping her. He had not picked up the locksmith's phone. He had not handed her the address. But he had left the hospital. He had taken the cash out of the account. He had known, he said. "I don't know what I thought would happen," I said. "I think you thought I would come home to a different situation and adjust to it." He was quiet. "That's what she always expected," I said, "that I would adjust." The adjusting was over. Rosalind called me a month later. It was a short call, and her voice was different, smaller, less certain of the room. She said she had acted badly. She did not say she was sorry in so many words, but she said she had acted badly, and for Rosalind Mercer, that was the closest available territory to an apology. I told her I appreciated her calling. I meant it in the way I meant it precisely, without extra warmth, but without coldness either. I repainted the kitchen in November, a deep sage green I had been thinking about for 2 years, that Owen had always steered towards something more neutral, something that would appeal to future buyers. I did not want a kitchen that appealed to future buyers. I wanted a kitchen that was mine. The white mug went back to the windowsill, between the succulent and the river stones, catching the morning light in the new green kitchen, like it had always lived there. The side garden had done something remarkable over the summer, which was simply to grow, responding to the attention I had given it, now that I was no longer organizing my weekends around other people's comfort and expectations. The rose bushes along the fence had put out a second bloom I had not expected. The lavender I had planted in the spring was establishing itself in the particular determined way lavender does once it decides a place suits it. I stood at the kitchen window on that August morning and looked at all of it, and thought about the version of myself who had stood at this same window 8 years earlier, in an empty kitchen with a new deed, thinking about what it meant to own something entirely. That version of me had been right about most things. She had simply not yet understood that ownership was not just a legal document. It was a daily practice, a choice made repeatedly to maintain the boundaries of what was yours, even when the choosing was inconvenient, even when other people found the choosing difficult to accept. I had learned that the hard way. Most worthwhile things are learned that way. Nadia texted that morning to say she had sent a new file referral my way. An estate dispute she thought I would find interesting. I texted back that she knew me too well. She sent a laughing face and I set the phone down and picked up my coffee. The mug was warm. The kitchen was green. The new shoot on the succulent had straightened toward the light and was doing fine. Outside, a pair of cardinals had found the feeder I had put up in the spring. One red, one brown, taking turns with a kind of unhurried cooperation that I found, for no particular reason I could name, deeply reassuring. 10 months later, on a quiet Thursday morning in August, I was at the kitchen counter making coffee when I looked up and noticed the light. It came through the window at the particular angle it only reaches in late summer, low and warm, hitting the sage-green wall and making the whole room look like something from a painting I would have bought if I had ever stopped long enough to go to galleries. The succulent on the windowsill had put out a new shoot. The river stones were exactly where they had always been. The white mug was in my hand. I held it for a second longer than necessary. The way you hold something when you are not thinking about holding it but some part of you notices the weight of it. Then I poured my coffee and stood at the counter and looked out at the side garden, which had grown considerably since I had stopped managing it around other people's preferences. The divorce had been finalized 6 weeks earlier. It had been, in Carmen's word, clean as divorces go, which is to say, it was not easy, but it was straightforward, because the property had always been mine and the financial picture, once fully documented, was not ambiguous. Owen had moved to a rental across town. We had spoken twice since the paperwork was done, both times briefly and without rancor, which was the best that could be said. Rosalind had stopped referring to my house as the family home. I thought about the woman I had been when I first moved into this house. 33 years old, fresh deed in hand, standing in the empty kitchen, thinking about all the particular ways a space could belong to a person. That version of me had not been wrong about anything. She had just taken a long way around to remembering it. The mug was warm in both hands. The morning was very quiet. The new shoot on the succulent turned slightly toward the light, doing what growing things do. Some rooms take a long time to become fully yours, and then one morning you stand in them and they simply are. Here is what I keep coming back to, even now. When someone assumes your silence means consent, when they look at your patience and decide it is permission, what does that tell you about how they understand the difference between love and ownership? And what does it say about us that we sometimes let the adjusting go on so long that even we forget what we were adjusting from? The quietest thing I did was also the most important. I did not argue. I did not explode. I simply held on to the fact of what was mine and let the law say the rest. The deed was always in my name. She just forgot. I knew what that meant. Thank you for watching. Leave a comment. Tell me where you are watching from. And subscribe for more stories like this one.